Welcome to, we'll call this an episode, the next episode of the Temple of Grief. And tonight, so as of the date of the recording of this video, we are on about day 7 of the Snowmageddon in Erie, Pennsylvania, 2024. And so it's a really perfect opportunity for deep reflection on identity, reality, life, etc. And I've also been doing quite a bit of reading of Bill Plotkin. I don't know if you've heard of him, but this is a book that was recommended to me a few years ago, The Journey of Soul Initiation. And I actually just recently acquired this one, which he wrote before that, and that one actually builds on this. And what I want to do, and so that, just to kind of give a brief overview, and I am not any sort of Bill Plotkin expert. I'm not even an expert in what he does, which is a sort of eco-depth psychology, I think is one of the ways they were describing it. And so his sort of whole vision and purpose in his life and in his work that he does, I forget what his institute is called, but they lead people on outdoor wilderness vision quest type activities, generally for the purposes of what he calls an encounter with your own soul. And so tonight, what I want to propose is an encounter with the soul of America. And I'm deliberately saying the soul of America because I want us to open our ideas of what we think of with that word, America, because there are more than one America. There are the Americas. This whole hemisphere is the Americas. And many people often conflate the word American with someone who is a citizen of the country called the United States of America. So when we are encountering the soul of America, we are encountering all of those ways that that word gets used, and all of those ways that we understand it, and all of those ways that we use it in our lives and inhabit it in our lives. So just wanted to say that I've not trained in what he does, but having trained with the Four Winds Society in energy medicine, the things that he points out are, I've had a lot of very parallel experiences through my journey of going through the shamanic energy medicine wheel and learning about that way of being with the world, that way of self-healing or self-holing, which is actually a phrase that Bill Plotkin also uses. He talks about holing, W-H-O-L, holing, becoming whole. And he describes in this book, The Journey of Soul Initiation, he gives a little chart and he describes this, what he calls the Soulcentric development wheel. And so it's different from the medicine wheel as we learned it in shamanic energy medicine. It has it still has north, south, east, and west, but it has a whole different set of categories for understanding what each of those directions means. And he also has them divided into stages, 8 stages of life, or what he calls the psychosocial development of, or I guess psychosocial spiritual development of a human being, or the potential psychosocial spiritual development of a human being inhabiting a life on this planet. And today I'm only going to talk about 4 of these 8 stages, really only briefly, because I believe if we look at the country called the United States of America, if we look at its life cycle thus far, we can use these stages of Bill Plotkin's to kind of understand where we are in the evolution of the soul of America. So now Bill Plotkin also makes it clear that soul initiation is sort of like advanced work, but soul encounter is the very, very first sort of phenomenon that occurs at the beginning of a very deep kind of spiritual journey of understanding what it means to have a soul or to be a soul, or how we inhabit the meat suit that we're wearing. How do we imagine ourselves inside this meat suit that we're wearing, and what is our relationship to the meat suit that we're wearing, and what is our relationship to all of the life forms on this planet that we're inhabiting while we're living in this meat suit. So, so he talks about these stages. And he also talks about, so this wheel that he describes, the eco-soulcentric development wheel, he compares it to what he calls an ego-centric or an ego-soulcentric development wheel, which is what in Western society we generally are kind of escorted through in life. Excuse me. And so in this eco-soulcentric development wheel, he talks about the first stage as, he calls it the innocent in the nest. And he talks about how in that stage, which he also calls, I think, the first cocoon in one of his later books. So the first cocoon is actually when you are in young childhood, when you are learning how to form your ego of who you are, right? You're learning in those stages, those early stages, the child is learning to understand, like, who is I? Who is the I? And the primary task, if you will, during the first stage is to protect the innocence, to take care of innocence, to make sure that innocence is kept clean and clear and happy and innocent. Then the second stage, he calls it the explorer in the garden. And in this stage, it's all about discovering the natural world and learning cultural ways of being. So, and that's sort of metaphorically aligned with the stage of kind of late childhood before you get to adolescence, right? So that's when children start to learn sort of social norms and rules and things like that, how to be. And also just really it's about exploration. It's about really exploring the natural world around them, if one is in this eco-soul-centered way. So I'm looking at this as a metaphor for the life of the United States of America. And I feel like we've had some arrested development in those 2 stages. And I'll talk about why in a second. Because the third stage, which is where I think we are, and I think we have been probably, maybe for 50 or 100 years, the third stage, they call it Thespian at the Oasis. And it's all about what he calls creating a secure and authentic social self. And that's all about conforming and rebelling. That's all about understanding where one's authentic self fits in relation to the prescribed roles that have been given to us in society. And so, for example, as an example, coming out as queer, One has to, in this particular society we live in, determine, how and when that is the safest and most comfortable way to do it, because there are ramifications sometimes to living an authentic life. So what I think has happened to this country called the United States of America is I think we had some birth trauma. We had some trauma culturally right at the very beginning of our existence as a country on this planet. Even though consciously and ideally and theoretically, this country was founded on the principles of liberty and equality, the actual de facto reality is that this country, at the very same time that we were espousing these ideals of liberty and equality, we were committing genocide against the native peoples of this continent who were already living here. And we were enslaving people who had been stolen from their homelands in Africa and brought to this continent by force. So that is the birth trauma that is surrounding the beginning of the country that is called the United States of America. And what do we know about trauma? We know that if it goes unaddressed, it can be very damaging to ourselves and to the people around us that we love. So how do we address it? Well, and I'm not a trauma specialist, but what I do know is that stuffing it and ignoring it is not the way to heal. What I understand of trauma is that the way to heal is to get to the point where you can recognize and accept that whatever it was happened. And when you can learn to re-narrate the experience in a way that honors who you are authentically. So we have to re-narrate our founding mythology. We don't have to do anything, but I think that it would be in our best interests, in the highest interests of all, that as we are moving through what is essentially the next phase is the dark night of the soul. That's where we are heading. We have been in this stage of conforming and rebelling to the point that it has gotten so polarized, and to the point that our mediated sources of information have become so siloed that it becomes very difficult to even understand what is true and what is real when two very completely diametrically opposed versions of the truth get held up as true, and they're completely contradictory. So if you think about it, it's almost as if this country was founded on gaslighting, right? When we get to the point that we don't even understand what is truth, that's what happens when you've grown up in an environment where you can't discern what truth is, because your truth is being questioned on a regular basis. Because when you think about it, so those were our birth trauma of the inception of this country called the United States of America. And then we also had a childhood trauma. If you look at the life of the United States of America, in less than 100 years into our existence, we had a civil war. And people can talk about whatever they want about whether it was about states' rights or whether it was about slavery or whether it was about economics or whether it was about the North or the South or whatever it was about. But we know that the landowners who also had enslaved people as property, that their economic model depended on slavery to work. So yes, they had economic interests, but those economic interests we're dependent on a phenomenon that we consider to be abhorrent. Now, of course, in our Constitution, the amendment that tells us we didn't actually end slavery. All we did was say that the only time it's legal is as punishment for a crime, which is when we had the birth of the prison industrial complex in the United States of America. So we're still not really free. And we're still not really equal. So until we look at those traumatic wounds from our birth trauma and our childhood trauma, because with that Civil War, the South didn't secede. So it's as if the divorce that the family went through that was so bitter and so toxic and so awful that they ended up back together and had to live. Well, what about the Republic of New Africa? Perhaps we should have let them secede. Maybe that would have been a more amicable dissolution of the so-called United States of America. So I just want to invite you and all of us, myself included, as we are entering, I've been sort of crafting a cocoon for myself. Even Mother Nature has said, here's your cocoon, here's 3 feet of snow. Oh, here's another 3 feet of snow. Oh, by the way, this is going to go on for like 10 days. So I'm here in my cocoon, and I'm inviting you also to take this winter season to create a cocoon for yourself, to reflect very deeply on how you would like to address the birth trauma of the founding of this country, the so-called United States of America, and the childhood trauma of the Civil War and what happened there, and how does that still make up who we are? Because what we need to get to is we need to get to the point where we can look at all of these sordid histories and decide for ourselves what we want to consciously focus on and draw into our reality. Whether it means the United States ends or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we take the most important ideals and we focus on planting those seeds into whatever is the new way. Whatever happens in next year, we just need to make sure that we are all consciously planting the seeds of love and compassion and acceptance and the things that we actually really do want this country, this whole hemisphere, to be founded on. And I think that liberty and equality are 2 of them. But what about an eco-soul-centric awareness of what it means to be free here on this planet? So those are the thoughts I'm going to leave you with. I'm not going to actually do any ceremony. I'm going to keep that end of it quiet today, and I'm just going to invite you to ponder. Have a good one. Stay safe out there.